Welcome again, everyone. This is our third installment of Champions of Progress, which is brought to you by Stellic. In this series of interviews, we present the latest insights in the registrar community, touching on current trends and best practices for the successful registrar. You'll hear from new expert guests each month, offering their experiences as they make an impact at thought-leading institutions across the United States. My name is Kim Shipwright, and I'll be your host. And our guest this week is Dr. Casey Bullock, who is Executive Director and University Registrar at Weber State University in Utah. Dr. Bullock has done extensive research in the area of transfer students, including articulation agreements, policy issues, and impact on time to degree. So because this is such a hot topic at most campuses, and this population of students is often one that we focus on, we will be taking questions, which we will address at the end of our discussion. So if you have questions for Casey as we proceed through today's interview, please feel free to use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will get to those as time allows at the conclusion of our conversation. So we'll no further ado, we welcome you to the program, Casey.
Thank you. The generous introduction.
Oh, I cut it down from all of your accolades. So yes, time does allow for a few of those though. The majority of your work has been at Weber State, which I think has some kind of unique qualities in terms of its student body and offerings and kind of the culture there. So can you tell us a little bit more about that institution?
Yeah, happy to. Weber State is located in northern Utah in Ogden, just at the base of the mountains. And it's a fairly large institution with 28 to 30,000 students. But part of those students is about 10,000 concurrent enrollment students. And so we have a unique mission. We're considered a regional campus, but we're a dual mission institution, meaning that we serve a community college and a university function. So we have a bit of an identity crisis at our institution. So we have everything from a certificate all the way to a doctorate degree. And we're serving all different types of students, first generation students, students who are on our campus because of a particular program. So very high ability students. And so it makes for a really interesting campus to work for, but it's been a great campus to work for because our faculty is really focused on teaching and supporting students. And we've been able to collaborate on quite a few things, and it's been a great campus to work for. So, but we sit right between two larger institutions, University of Utah and Utah State University. And so our biggest competition for them is in basketball. We are a big basketball community school, and so Damian Lillard was who graduated from Weber State, who plays for the Blazers now. And so that's our claim to fame is Damian. So we're going to ride his coattails for a little bit. So
as you should, absolutely. Well, I just think that's an interesting perspective, and I'm sure that it offers you a few challenges as you work with such a diverse population on your campus. But in terms of today's talk, we're going to kind of focus on transfer students. And, I know the campus I've been at, a lot of resources and energy went into learning about and trying to better serve that population. So I think a lot of campuses spend a lot of time on researching the best ways to attract them and form agreements and whatnot. So how did you get interested in this particular population?
Well, I was a transfer student myself. I attended a school in Southern Utah, and I transferred to Utah State University. And through that process, I was pursuing business, psychology, and communications kind of all at the same time. And they told me that I had to retake an Excel class that I felt like I already had taken. And this really kind of set me on this pathway that I was like, wait a second, I've already taken this class. Like, why did it take so long to get my credits evaluated? Why didn't you recognize my associate's degree? And so it just kind of became a passion for me. I always wanted to go into higher education as higher education administration. And so when I started to pursue my master's degree, it was transfer is what I wanted to study. When I went on to do my doctorate, it was transfer students that I wanted to study. And when I really got into higher education, I was the transfer coordinator at Weber State. The transfer coordinator position was kind of a unique position that they created. It was created out of the admissions office. It was intended to be the transfer recruiter, but the admissions office at the time did the transcript evaluation for transfer students. So basically, I was everything transfer. I did transfer recruitment, transfer advising, transfer articulation. If you needed a phone transferred, I transferred your phone. If it had transfer in the name, I did it, which was actually a nice experience because I got all aspects of transfer, not just the recruitment side, not just the articulation or the processing side, not just the advising side of it. I was able to see it all come together in one group because it was all me. It was more than I could handle, but it was all me.
Well, good. So based on that background, trial by fire or whatever,
Yeah.
in your opinion, what's the critical first step that institutions should take who want to improve their transfer process? So where do they begin to really evaluate that?
Yeah, so this was an experience that I went through when I first started at Weber State. I would go to the colleges, local colleges around my area as I was recruiting. I would tout Weber State as place to be, and then they would come here and they'd show up at my door upset because the credits didn't get transferred. So the first step that I really had to do is I had to fix my own house. I had to fix the evaluation process, and that's where I first started. At the time, we had a really broken system. And I think a lot of institutions can relate to this. It's just, well, how do we do all this together? And I had some pretty good support of building something that we were able to get evaluations done faster. The reason why I start with that piece is because that's where that's the piece that you need for advising. And so when you're telling the student, you may need to take this course, you might not, depends on what this course is going to come in as. We really don't know. It could be 3 weeks to 3 months before we get an idea of what that's going to be. That's really problematic for any transfer student, and it's really discouraging. And when you have that transfer student that took a course, then finally got their course articulated as the exact same course that they just took, it's really deflating to them. And so we have to fix the process first of getting the courses articulated as quickly as possible so that you can get to the advising piece. When you have those articulations in place, that gives you a better position to build the articulation agreements down the road. And so that's the first place to start is really the processing side.
Yeah, and I'm assuming you worked closely with individual departments to identify courses that were appropriate for transfer and was that did that go well? I mean, were they receptive to that little nudge to basically review all of those syllabi?
Yeah, so this is the interesting part, and this might not be able to be completed at all institutions, but at Weber State, we were able to pull this off. So when we first started, I had 2 evaluators that were evaluating transfer articulation, and we were doing it in-house in the admissions office. Well, what scared me kind of half to death was one of them didn't have a college degree, wasn't really qualified to do articulations. And the other one did have a college degree, but they're not content experts. And so I actually had 2 evaluators articulating courses differently. And I actually had this situation. I had twins who took the exact same class, and one evaluator evaluated it one way, and another evaluator evaluated it a different way. And I was like, this is a problem. This evaluations have to be done by a content expert. And so we worked with the provost and the associate provost for enrollment services to really work with the deans to get something in place, because we identified this is a huge problem. The big selling point is exactly the point that I was making, which was, I'm not the content expert. We need the content experts to make these decisions. And so we went out to the deans and we went out to the department chairs and says, we need 2 people in every department to do an evaluation of transfer articulation. One of them's going to be a primary point person. The other one's going to be a secondary point person. So because transfer never stops, it's like this waterfall of it just keeps coming. It's not stopping. We needed 2 people in place. And so what we set up and what we got them committed to, we actually did an MOU on this one. With the deans, it says you're going to have 2 people in every department. The primary point person will have 3 days to evaluate an articulation and return it back to our office. If the primary point person doesn't respond within 3 days, we're going to send it to the secondary point person. They'll have 2 days to respond. If they don't respond in 2 days, it will be sent to the dean. That's what really got them moving. Was nobody likes to be told on to their parents, right? Nobody likes to be told on to the dean. And so once we got a rhythm going, it started to work. But the challenge is that we didn't really have a technology in place to do it. At one point, we were sending out flash drives, because this was probably about 15 years ago. And then we were sending it through email. But you had to download the document, update your information, upload the document back in, and then email it off back to us. But it was a lot that we had to try to manage and try to figure out who didn't have their articulations and who didn't have, who was late getting their stuff in. And so we ended up building a system that was our own .NET system that we built that managed that workflow for us. And so when we put it into our system, any course that we don't already have in our database system, we mark it as needed to be reviewed. And so we actually articulated it in our system as elect REV, meaning reviewed. So the subject was elect, the number was REV, and that gave us the ability to pull out any course that we needed to have reviewed into a file. So we pulled all these out, and then once we had that in a workflow system, we send it out to the departments, and then all they had to do is make their decision and automatically send it back to us. I really challenged my IT folks with this one. I said, we wanted to update the student's record, and I had no idea how they were going to do that. But I just kind of said it and hoped that they could figure it out. And surprisingly enough, they figured it out. So the only thing that we really had to do was get the course description. And so when we get it in our office, we get the course description, then we would put it in and then send it off to the department. Once the department made the decision, it actually automatically loaded it into our database for transfer articulation, and it updated the student record, which was huge. So right now, we're sitting at articulations are being done within 5 days. A fully articulated transcript is done within 5 days. And it's actually, that's the far end. Most of them are done within 24 hours of us sending it off. These departments understand, they've now understood that this is their curriculum. And that was kind of a mindset that we needed to try to get them on, is that articulations just aren't articulations. It's your curriculum. It's you saying that this student is prepared for that next level. It's those learning outcomes that you need to evaluate. And then they really kind of started to pick up on that. And so that's kind of the long-winded way of how we kind of got there. But we had a lot of support, but we did a top-down method, and it really had to have buy-in from the provost, from the president, from the deans, all the way down. To say we all need to come together to make sure that we get these articulations in.
That's awesome. And yeah, I understand it's a campus-wide effort, and it doesn't take much if there's 1 or 2 departments that say we don't want to play, that really can impact you. So, all right. So given that scenario, what policy changes on the campus did you feel you had to introduce to make all of this run more smoothly?
Yeah, so policy on campus. So one of the things that we wanted to do is in the state of Utah, we have really good policy from the state because we're a state school. And so we have common course numbering, we have uh, program to program articulation for general education. So if they complete their general education at one institution, it completes the general education at our institution. If you get an associate's degree, we'll waive the general education requirements. And so we started to expand some of those out to other regionally accredited institutions. So we took the idea that if you've completed your associate's degree at a regionally accredited institution, we'll waive the general education requirements at our institution, all except for American institutions because that's a state law. So we have on our books that a student has to complete an American institutions class in order to earn a degree from a state school. So that's one of the critical pieces that we had to make sure. And then we started to participate in the passport, the WICHE passport, which allowed us to waive the general education. We didn't go from institutions to say, we'll automatically waive your general education if you have that complete. We went to the associate's degree because it was easier for us to manage. That provided some better leeway for a lot of students so they didn't feel like they're having to go back and take some courses over again. And so, so we started with those policies, but we've now had to adjust the policies a little bit further because we're now starting to see some articulation, or not articulation, some associate's degrees that are called associate's degrees, but they're intended for transfer, which their suite of general education requirements aren't fully complete. The intended is to transfer within the state and then complete the general education requirements at this institution that they transfer to. This mainly came out of California. And so we started to see this with some San Diego schools. And so we had to change our policy that if it says associate's degree, we're not just going to waive the general education, we're going to do a minimum standard that we're going to look for. So we use NCAA policy for transfer athletes that they have to complete quantitative literacy, English composition, and then I think it's physics or physical science in there as the minimum standards of what we need to have in order to evaluate another institution's associate degree to complete our associate's degree. Because we were getting some that didn't have any math, didn't have any English. And we're like, I'm not sure I can send a student through with a bachelor's degree without any math or English. So it's evolved over time, but that's kind of where we started. And then at the state level, they're trying to find more efficient ways of transferring students within the state, and those kind of trickle down into the institution as well.
I want to talk about the statewide body on which you serve and its impact, not only for your institution, but the kinds of things that that group deals with. But we have one quick question that I want to address while we're on this topic. And it's a question that we frequently get on a campus is you mentioned using course descriptions as your method of articulating equivalencies. And the question is, what about syllabi? Did certain departments say, no, I want something more extensive. I want a syllabus for that course?
Yeah, we do have departments that do want a syllabus, and that's where it's becoming more difficult. I think we're on the precipice of technology at this point that we can start to get into syllabus. Because right now, and Weber State is the offender of this too, is that we don't have our syllabus online for it to be accessed anywhere. But I know some institutions do have all their syllabi online so that they can be accessed. And so it's difficult to get the syllabus. Also, what I think is helpful in this area is I know that some institutions with their course description actually have listed the learning outcomes for the course in their course description. And I think that's another method to ease that transfer process between institutions. But when we do have the departments that want the syllabi, we do kind of have to do a little bit of a check on them because sometimes we'll have a department that says, well, the person taught the class doesn't have a PhD. Yeah. Okay, what does that say about the content of the class? Have you evaluated the content? And they're like, well, they don't have a PhD. I'm like, that's fine, but what's the content of the course? And so we have to bring them back to learning outcomes and content of the course. And so I'm hoping as we evolve in higher education that we have easier access to syllabi, because I think that's the better evaluation than the description. I've come across some descriptions that are pretty vague. And a lot of times for our students, if we do an articulation and they come back to us and say, I swear I've taken this class, I swear that I've done this, they have the ability to appeal our decision of the department. So they can go back to the department and they can provide the additional information beyond the course description. They can provide the syllabus, they can provide the actual text. And we've had that happen before where they marked it as an elective within the department, not as equivalent to a course. And then the student came back and says, you're using the exact same text that I used in the course. Here's the syllabus, here's the text. And then they said, okay, we'll change that. So yeah, that's a challenge, but we just don't have the technology right now to make that easy to do syllabus.
So talk a little bit about the statewide group that you're a member of, and what are some of the issues that that group has been addressing?
Yeah, so I sit on a transfer council for the Utah Board of Higher Education. This board consists of a representative from every institution and a president from like institutions. So a president from the community college, a president from a regional campus, a president from a research institution campus. And so it really kind of consists of a lot of academic vice presidents, and then there's me as this lowly registrar sitting on the council too. But I'm logistics and implementation, because they'll throw out some ideas that I'm like, I'm not sure we can actually pull that off. So this council, what they're supposed to do, they've been by the state, they've been charged to resolve transfer issues. And so what they're getting is the anecdotal situation. My granddaughter, a legislature says my granddaughter transferred and they didn't accept her credits. And we have to kind of say, well, what do you mean by not accepting credits? Because we'll accept your credits. They may not be applicable to your degree, but we've accepted your credits. It's just like if you change majors, not all your classes that you took in your previous major are going to apply to your new major. And so part of this
to make a poster of that, Casey, so we could all put it in our office, is that the courses do transfer, they just may not apply. And if you change your major, we all need that as or print out little cards that we can just hand out.
I've been hounding this transfer and applicability argument. And our commissioner for academics has kind of picked up on the applicability part of it and saying, well, how do we make it more applicable? And so they've been throwing out all different ways. So they've been trying to study this from various aspects, and some of the information that they're getting is anecdotal. Something didn't transfer, or it took a long time to transfer. And it's been a kind of an interesting process because each institution has a little bit different transfer processes or evaluation processes. And I was like, well, that's not Weber State. And I'm gonna pound my chest on that one. But we started to look at, well, how do we make this a better process? Because Utah was pretty on the forefront of common course numbering, having good transfer articulation policies, but how do we make this more seamless? And so based off of some of the research that I've done is that I found that students who earned an associate's degree and transferred were less efficient than students who didn't earn an associate's degree and transferred. And this was kind of something that was like, wait a second, I rechecked my numbers on that, because we're telling students to get their associate's degree and then transfer. We have,
just to clarify, when you say less efficient, you mean they ended up taking more credit hours to get their baccalaureate, right?
Yeah, so efficiency is based off of total credit hours at graduation. So these students who earned an associate's degree were having more credit hours at graduation than students who didn't earn an associate's degree but then transferred. And there's a lot of variance in there that need to be addressed, but this was kind of something that was said, well, we have a problem. Now let's investigate what the problem is. And so we started to look at this gap in the associate's degree. And so we have these general associate's degrees. You get your general education requirements, which consists of maybe like 30 to 38 credit hours, which leaves you for an associate's degree 22 to 30 hours of classes that you just have to take to get the associate's degree. So if those aren't guided, those end up being inefficient courses, or courses that don't apply to a degree. And so where we started our conversation at was, well, how do we eliminate that? So one thought is let's just give them an associate's degree for the first 2 years of their academic career. And there's some wild things thrown out here. So they were talking about like, hey, if they got 60 credits, let's just give them an associate's degree. I'm like, no, can't do that one. So we started to talk about the map, mapping it out from when they start to the transition to the next institution. And so we now started down this path of these transfer associate's degrees is what we are investigating now. Is this something that we can do? Because part of the problem is depending on the area that you're transferring into, I would give different advice. And so there are some degrees that it's like, yes, get your general education complete, get your associate degree and transfer. It's a good transition. But there's other degrees, such as a lot in the STEM fields, physics, chemistry. I would not suggest they complete all the general education courses, and that they should actually spread it out over their academic career. Because what ends up happening in physics is that they end up with 5 credit hour physics classes with no general education to kind of break up some of those more difficult classes. And so our advising is that they need to spread that out. But if you have a student that completes all their general education in an associate's degree and then transfers, then it becomes a more difficult, and we might see more dropout of those STEM related fields. I don't have evidence on that yet, but that's my kind of suspicion, is that as it gets more difficult, they might change pathways. So we're looking at this transfer associate's degree that is more seamless. And so it's really kind of the first 2 years of a degree, and then they go in to do the second 2 years of the degree. And we have some programs that work really well with that. We have like a computer science program that we actually have. We're down at the community college with our computer science degree, and that they can do their computer science courses, and we actually can have them transition right there on their campus to our program. And so it's really mapping it out. And what they came up with, and this is, I'll give credit to Salt Lake Community College for this comment, is that they wanted them to transfer at junior level. And I as a registrar, I'm thinking just numbers, and I'm like, well, junior level is just 60 hours, greater than 60 hours. What does that mean? And they clarified that and said, we want our students to transfer and not have to go back and retake a lower division course. And I was like, okay, now we're talking at the same level. That's what they meant by junior transfer, is that can we make sure from the community college that they're meeting all the prerequisites, getting all the foundational work, and that they can transfer into our upper division classes, our bachelor degree, without having to go back and take additional courses. Now, you can imagine trying to put this all out on a map. And that's where we're at now, is this possible? And so right now, we really have to break it down to back to learning outcomes. What are the learning outcomes for the first 2 years of your program? And then that changes what articulation agreements that we can create. Traditionally, we've talked about articulation agreements of being a one-to-one course. this course from this institution goes this course from this institution. Well, we had an articulation agreement that we were working with, and we had a program that said, well, these 3 courses equal our 2 courses. And I'm like, that doesn't, from a database standpoint, that's really hard to make that relationship. But there's different types of articulation agreements that we can look at, which is a program to program articulation agreement, which means that, hey, if you complete your associate's degree, we are confident that you've met the learning outcomes that are needed in order to continue on in the next program. And so we're just gonna, in a degree evaluation system, waive the requirements that you've met based off of this associate's degree. So it's not a one-to-one course, it's a program to program that we're gonna say, these are all equivalent, and we're gonna have you go forward from there. So
one of the problems that we ran into is, of course, the community college here are funded in part on graduation, not totally, but, and so their graduation rates, they want to show an increase in students who are getting the associate's degree. And so we came along with the same information you did, in that completing an associate's really doesn't always work in the best interest of the student. In other words, they end up with more credit hours than when they finally transfer and try to complete the baccalaureate. So, you know, working with our community college partners was difficult in that, you know, we almost had competing interests in terms of them wanting to keep the student there and us saying it's better if they transfer before they finish the associate degree. But I know institutions are doing reverse transfer in big numbers now. And, you know, that was certainly something that we articulated to our community college partners as well. But it is kind of a, one size doesn't fit all. In other words, just like you've been saying, that depending on, you know, the student and the degree plan, that might be easier for them to accomplish, and another institution might not see that in the same light. So so unfortunately for those in the 4-year institution, it does make it more difficult to come up with something that's easy to map out and to understand.
yeah, and that's one thing that we started to do with our articulation agreements, was not just the one-to-one course. We said, let's map this out over 4 years. And so let's provide a degree map of the transition between the 2 schools. We also talked about reverse transfer at Weber State, but when I presented that to some of our administration, they said, why would we do a reverse transfer? We can offer the associate's degree here. And I can't argue with that. It's just playing nicely in the sandbox, is what it is. And so it really kind of said, well, what can we do to get them a credential and not have to worry about at what point can we send the courses back and forth and get the associate's degree completed? And because that was a concern for us too, is that we are performance-based funding in our state, and it is based off of graduates. And we want to support our local community college to make sure that they are getting the credit for the students that are graduating. One of the thoughts that I had was, well, can we give dual credit for a student that earns a bachelor's degree, but may not have earned an associate's degree from the community college? And so they attended the community college, they transferred before getting an associate's degree, but they earned a bachelor degree from us. And Sonic Community College has every much of a claim on that student, where they taught them for the first half of their career, and we picked it up at the end. So can we give dual credit for that? And I think that was one area that we could probably explore a little bit more, but we haven't really gone down that road. Is do we? And that's a question about a lot of this stuff.
Right.
Is what policy is keeping us from being more creative in in the way that we address transfer articulation and agreements? Because state policy does cause some challenges that way, where can we change the performance funding? Can we look at different ways of doing that? And that's one thing that we brought up in that committee also, is that, is this making sense for our students based on the performance funding? And the other area is federal financial aid. of what they're willing to pay for and their accreditation standards and that type of stuff. And so I think there's a lot of, I think we can go back and question a lot of these policies to say, well, how does it work for this group? And I think we might find that um, the policy is the hindrance to us being more creative about how we can transfer a student.
One of my last questions was going to be, what do you see as the future focus for recruitment and retention of transfer students? And that's probably a loaded question. And we're kind of running out of time. So I don't know if you have just one or two highlights that you'd like to give. And then we have one other question before we wrap up today.
Yeah, so I see for transfer, the future focus needs to be on learning outcomes, really identifying learning outcomes. If I can get down to identifying learning outcomes for my courses, for my programs, it makes articulation and transfer a lot easier. Because if I can get a group around the table talking about learning outcomes and say, do we all agree on the same learning outcomes? Do we feel like this is prepared the student? It changes the conversation on transfer that we're not bickering over a course to course type of situation. We can change the conversation is that, do we agree that they are getting the education that they need to be successful? And I think that's the direction that it's going, because it starts to get, we start from these courses and it's like, well, let's go down to a more micro level and let's talk about outcomes. And I think that's probably where it's going to go a little bit. And I think that you'll start to have more interstate type of agreements happening. I think WICHE's done some things that, WICHE is the Western Interstate Commission on Higher Education. I think I got that right. And so they came up with a passport to kind of do an agreement across states. I think we'll start to see more of those happening. And these broader conversations at this upper level to say, what can we do to make a better transition, and start to really focus on the other area. Probably the last point I make is to focus on the structure of the degree. Does the structure of the degree make sense? And can that structure be changed to benefit transfer students and transition? Not only just transfer students, but changing majors within an institution. Those students are less efficient at graduation also if you change your major. And so it's any time that we're changing from one area to the next, and there's not many students that know exactly what they want to do when they enter college. It's that process, that transformational experience that they're having as they go to college and say, oh, this is where I found my passion for something. And how do we better support that in higher education? And we're really starting to look at structures of degrees to say, can we allow for that exploration? And even across institutions, can we allow for exploration from a community college to a four-year institution, or even between two four-year institutions? So
one quick question, Casey, that's I think probably relevant to a lot of people is when your policy of waiving the gen ed requirements for students who come in with an associate's degree, does that mean the students have to have completed that degree before they enter at Weber, or do you allow them to take classes, transfer those back, get a reverse transfer associate's degree, and then waive the remaining gen ed?
that's a great question. So it's all based off of, do you have the credential or not? And so if they transfer before they complete the degree, we'll just wait until they complete the degree. And so as long as you have that associate's degree on your transcript, then we'll evaluate that based off of having that credential. In the state of Utah, we were doing some things of a letter of completion of general education. And so they would get a letter stating that their general education is complete, and even though they didn't have a degree. We've since evolved beyond that, where we started using passports to do that, or we've actually offered a certificate of completion in general education. And so a lot of institutions had that. And so if those credentials are on your transcript, then we'll process those credentials. So we base it off of the credential, not of when they transferred it. It's if you got it, we'll give it to you. So
So a student could enter and be under one set of general ed requirements in that you have to take these courses. And then when they're a sophomore, they present evidence of having completed the associates, and then that changes their evaluation, correct?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it. That's interesting. We chose to do the opposite, that it was based on a decision at point of entry so that there wasn't confusion in terms of advising. But I understand what you're saying, and that can certainly make sense as well. So, well, Casey, again, this was a hot topic for a lot of people. Transfer students are always on the minds of four-year institutions in particular. So we do appreciate your comments today, and I will probably be sending you a couple questions for follow-up, and
Sure.
you can
Happy to.
respond to those individuals offline. So thanks again. We appreciate all your great discussion and input.
Yeah, thank you. This has been fun.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.